Insurance professionals work hard every day to keep people safe. But as technology transforms the industry, how can insurers protect not only their clients, but also shield themselves from ever-changing cyber risks? My name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm the host of the Insuring Cyber podcast, a bi-monthly look into how the world of cyber and the business of insurance are connected. Hello, and welcome to the Insuring Cyber podcast. This is part 2 of our 2-part conversation about the new U.S. cyber trust mark and how it could shape the cybersecurity and insurance landscape in the future. The Biden-Harris administration in July announced the cybersecurity certification and labeling program to help U.S. consumers more easily choose smart devices that are safer and less vulnerable to cyber attacks. Under the program, consumers would see a newly created Shield logo on products that meet established cybersecurity criteria from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The Federal Communications Commission is expected to seek public comment as the proposed voluntary cybersecurity labeling program is rolled out. The program is set to be up and running by 2024. If you missed part 1 of this conversation, called What to Know About the Proposed U.S. Cyber Trust Mark, you can check that episode out on Insurance Journal TV or wherever you get your podcasts. This week, we're diving a little more into some of the insurance considerations with someone who's worked in both the public and private sector, as well as another guest who helped develop some of the program's requirements. My first guest is Dr. Sezaneh Seymour, Vice President and Head of Regulatory Risk and Policy at InsurTech Coalition. She has a career in the public sector and prior to joining Coalition, served as Senior Advisor to the Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology on the National Security Council at the White House. She spent more than 15 years in various federal policy roles involving national security, emerging technology, and trade. She served as a Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and also served at the U.S. Department of the Treasury and the U.S. Department of State. She said in an article on Coalition's website that she made the decision to join the active insurance technology company because while serving at the National Security Council, she had a front-row seat to the consequences of poor cyber hygiene. Over a matter of months, she said she saw federal departments and agencies navigate the fallout from multiple significant cybersecurity incidents and came to appreciate the importance of, that's right, cyber insurance. What I love about Sezaneh's perspective on the latest U.S. cyber trust mark is that she told me the genesis of this program actually came from an executive order that was signed while she was still in the White House. So she's had a front row seat to its development and now has another view entirely while working for Coalition in the private sector. We talk about all of this and it's fascinating. Check out our conversation. Hi, Sezaneh. It's great to be speaking with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I'm looking forward to talking to you today about the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. But before that, I was just wondering if you could give a little overview of your background and some of the work that you do at Coalition.
Sure, happy to. I joined Coalition to establish our regulatory risk and policy function. One of our core goals is to shape public policy and expand our reach with new audiences, specifically governments and civil society. We're doing that in part by leveraging our technical expertise and our data-driven insights to educate the public about digital risk and the value really that the active cyber insurance model brings to managing that risk. I'm still surprised by how few people know that there's this innovative cyber insurance product that combines security services with traditional insurance. And that product can not just lessen the financial pain from a breach, but potentially prevent them. In terms of my background, I spent the last 18 years in government, and I served in various senior policy roles at the nexus of national security, technology, and trade. Among my more relevant roles is that I served as a senior advisor to the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology at the White House. It was there that I had a front row seat to the consequences of poor cyber hygiene that culminated in the ransomware surge of 2021. And I was also there for our nation's cyber Shields Up campaign that preceded Russia's further invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So that experience really shaped my worldview on the pervasive and insidious nature of cyber risk.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for giving an overview of your background. You have great experience. I'm so glad that you're here talking about this today. I know that Internet of Things technology has been a big topic recently, as it's become a part of a lot of different industries, including insurance. So, I was wondering how that technology is improving efficiency and sort of providing benefits for businesses in certain industries.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm in the sweet spot of Americans that didn't grow up as a digital native, but I adopted early enough to function as one. So I was just starting high school when computers and cell phones became a permanent fixture in most of our lives. And I still remember wondering if my aunt was secretly wealthy. She had this massive brick of a cell phone. It was one of the early days. It's easy to forget that the internet only became widely available in this country around 25 years ago. But to your question, the widespread availability of smart devices has brought countless benefits really to our society, as well as to our personal lives. Among the most obvious is efficiency. So today we optimize globally distributed supply chains in ways that we can only once imagine, right? So real-time tracking allows us to address shipping interruptions in transit. We can track and manage our inventories in real time, and both of those things have allowed us to move to a just-in-time manufacturing model. And that eliminates basically massive storage costs. Our cities are smart. We use sensors connected to the internet to improve how we manage traffic and distribute energy more efficiently. And the insurance industry is no exception. So thanks to internet-generated data combined with analytics, we have much better insight into consumer preferences so that we can more consistently meet consumer needs and expectations. Internet-enabled devices also give our industry the ability to price risks so accurately and granularly that we can offer personalized premiums now, right? And here I'm thinking about what the auto insurance industry is doing with telematics devices in cars, for example. So these devices also help us prevent certain losses. Just last month, I personally benefited from a smart sensor that detected and alerted me to a leak in a vacant property, preventing what could have otherwise been a very expensive claim. So the benefits here are so pervasive that it's just easy to forget how the internet has really revolutionized the way we live and do business.
Yeah, there are so many benefits. And I think you're right. It's hard to remember that the internet is actually fairly new because we've made such strides, in terms of technological advances in just a short amount of time. And so that's a good overview of some of the benefits. But, on the other hand, I know that there are some challenges, especially with consumer connected devices and, the cyber risks that come along with them. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what consumers and their insurers should be keeping in mind.
Yeah, so there is a dark side to interconnectivity. It also introduces new security risks that we didn't really have in an analog world. So take the laundry list of services I just rattled off, for example, and just imagine a malicious cyber actor disrupting them. Maybe I'll take a step back here and speak to the cyber challenges more broadly, because I think that's useful context for understanding the genesis of federal initiatives like the US Trustmark. So the nature of our cybersecurity challenge can really be summarized by three realities that we're navigating as an industry and really as a society. First, we have widespread security vulnerabilities across our infrastructure, and those vulnerabilities are growing by the day. So I really like the analogy that our security vulnerabilities are like unlocked digital windows and doors, and cyber criminals can walk right through them at any time. At the same time, we're also installing more unlocked digital windows and doors every single day. And that's because more products and services are now built smart by default, but they're not necessarily built secure by default. The second reality is that private businesses supply many of the critical goods and services on which our day-to-day life relies. Not just many, most. I think over 90% of that infrastructure is owned by the private sector. And it's those private businesses that make their own security, investment, and risk tolerance decisions. But we know from experiences, the consequences of a cyber disruption on any one business can be borne by a much broader pool of victims because there are cascading effects. And the third reality is criminals know cybercrime is profitable. They extract ransoms, induce fraudulent funds transfers, steal trade secrets. And I think it's reasonable to say that the cyber insurance industry broadly expects that criminals will continue to lean into cybercrime. So that's how, at least we at Coalition, think of cyber risk in the context of that broader environment. We know how devastating and costly a cyber-related business disruption can be, but we also know that there are, proactive steps that businesses can take to protect themselves.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense because those costs can really add up. And I like that analogy you used. We're so careful about locking the doors and windows on our homes. We should be just as careful when it comes to our cyber windows and doors. So I think that's a great point too. And I know we're talking about the US Cyber Trust Mark, and I know that it's the Biden-Harris administration recently announced its launch. So how do you see that affecting cyber insurers? And, could it be a benefit to them in helping, assess risk with their clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm in some ways it's personally surreal to see the cyber trust mark begin to take shape. I say that because its genesis is from an executive order that was signed while I was still in the White House. And I know a lot of incredibly talented people spent countless hours to make that a reality. I only mentioned that executive order because it was some of the earliest signaling from this administration that cybersecurity considerations must be integrated into our business operations and in our day-to-day lives. And the trust mark is an important step in that direction. So before getting to your question about the impact of, or the potential impact, I should say, of the trust mark on the insurance industry, let me just start with how it could change consumer behavior, because I think that's directly related. So right now, it's almost impossible to make purchasing decisions based on the security of a product. If I'm choosing from baby monitors, for example, then I don't really have a clear way of telling whether monitor A is more secure than monitor B, nor can I easily understand whether the monitor I'm buying collects data. And if so, what data does it collect? How long is that data kept? Is the data shared? And so forth. The trust mark has the potential to change that by making security and privacy information easily accessible in what will hopefully be plain language on a label. I've heard folks compare the Cyber Trust Mark program to the Energy Star program that allows consumers to compare, the relative efficiency of two appliances, like a washing machine, for example. And I think that's a really good analogy. You asked about the impact on insurers. The short answer is it's really too soon to tell whether and how insurers will benefit from Trustmark directly, but that's only because it's not yet in use, and a lot of the details have to be worked out before we see it actually hit the marketplace. Having said that, I do think there are three potential benefits that we can keep in mind as insurers. So first, just the very existence of a trust mark label should incent manufacturers to build products that prioritize security by design so they can benefit from that trust mark label. So as I said, that's a big problem today, right? Lots of products are built smart by default, but not secured by default. Second, I could see cyber insurance companies like Coalition point to Trustmark as a transparent source of information about the security and data privacy practices of a manufacturer and product. Back to the analogy about unlock windows and doors, a trust mark like label can essentially tell a consumer whether they're buying a door with a lock, and empowering the consumer to make better security choices benefits us all. And maybe finally, insurers are also consumers, right? So in that sense, we can benefit from a label when making our own procurement decisions for our business.
Yeah, that's a great overview of some of the benefits and the potential benefits for insurers as, we watch this evolve. And it's so cool to know that you were, following this from the very beginning when that executive order was signed. I can imagine that it's surreal to see it finally coming to fruition. And I know you mentioned the US Cyber Trust Mark. It's not live yet. And there's still like a few steps before we see the label actually in the marketplace. So I was wondering what those steps are and, if there would be an opportunity for insurers, for example, to participate in some of that.
Yeah, so the label isn't available on the market now, as you've said. The FCC has said that the earliest we'll see it in use is at the end of 2024. So what has happened so far is the government has announced the intention to launch the program and the label, and they've shared, the information, that information on the label, I should say, will be provided to consumers in a QR code. But a lot of other foundational details about the program still need to be ironed out. But there is a process set up so the public can contribute into shaping those details, including cyber insurers. So for example, the government is asking for input on things like which devices should be eligible for inclusion in this program, right? Should it phones? Should it be, computers, baby monitors, routers? How should security standards for different types of devices be developed? How should manufacturers demonstrate compliance with those security standards? And how can the government educate consumers about using that label and really prevent its misuse? So cyber insurers, especially insurtechs like Coalition that combine security services with traditional financial risk mitigation, will have some unique perspectives and I think useful insight to share in that process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this evolves. And I know that, public-private partnerships and cybersecurity initiatives seem to be, more of a focus lately. You have experience on the insurtech side with Coalition and also on the federal government side. And I know that, Coalition itself has collaborated with the government on several different initiatives. So I was wondering if you could talk sort of overall about how a partnership between the public and private sector is a benefit, especially in this current cyber risk environment.
Yeah, so Trustmark is just one of many cooperative partnerships. In fact, public-private cooperation in the cybersecurity space is reasonably common, and that's because of the many mutual benefits that come to governments and business. That's especially true, I would say, of more formalized public-private cooperative mechanisms like CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. It's a mouthful. Probably the most urgent driver of cooperation is the continuously evolving threat landscape. So there are two categories of cooperation relevant to cyber insurers, I think, that I would flag. The first is threat intelligence sharing. If you think of the threat landscape as a puzzle, government agencies and private businesses will typically have different pieces of that puzzle. And the full threat picture only comes together when those pieces of the puzzle are brought together. And that's why you'll often hear various partners talk about striving for near real-time threat information sharing. The second category of cooperation that I think is relevant to our space is on incident response. Coalition works with businesses to improve their cyber hygiene and address vulnerabilities, so they're less likely to experience a breach. But we also know that you can't prevent every single accident. And that's, just as it's best practice for a business to have a cyber incident response plan and to practice that plan, our country does the same. So CISA works with private sector partners to drill incident response plans.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great kind of overview of how these partnerships are proving to be a benefit in the current climate. And, you mentioned some of Coalition's initiatives in this regard. And I know in 2021, Coalition announced that it would make its cybersecurity risk assessment and continuous monitoring platform available for any organization to sign up for free. So I was wondering if you could talk about that work specifically and, why it's important.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with what we're doing and then talk a little bit about why it matters. So Coalition participated in President Biden's cybersecurity summit in 2021. And there, our CEO announced that Coalition will make our security risk monitoring platform, Coalition Control, available to organizations at no cost once a year. So what that means in practice is that any entity can go to Coalition Control online and get a risk assessment. Essentially, what that is Coalition looks at your business like a hacker would. Do you have unlocked windows and doors? Can we find compromised passwords online? Things like that. Then you'll get a report card that tells you how you did. Importantly, that report card will very clearly state if your business has critical vulnerabilities and offer some insight into how to address those vulnerabilities. That's important because we know from our own data that policyholders with even one unresolved critical vulnerability were 33% more likely to experience a cyber insurance incident and claim in 2022. So it's pretty powerful information to have. I'll offer maybe a more personal perspective and why I think this initiative is important. I gained some unique insight into what is preventing many organizations from doing more to improve their security posture while working directly with a variety of businesses in previous roles. I think we always assume it's cost or budget pressures that prevent action. And while that's important, and I don't want to discount that, I've observed that far more frequently organizations can get bogged down by analysis paralysis. And this is especially true for small and mid-sized businesses. So what I mean by that is the cyber challenge can feel so complex and dynamic that an organization may just simply not know where to start, and so they delay, or they can be overwhelmed trying to make sense of the sheer volume of cyber-related products and services in the marketplace. And our one-time risk assessment can help really cut through that noise with a prioritized action plan.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you always hear so much about the cost of managing cybersecurity or of managing your cyber risk rather, and how that can be prohibitive for some organizations. But I think this analysis paralysis that you mentioned is maybe an overlooked risk as well. So I think that's a good point. And, we've spoken about so much so far, but I was curious kind of overall, given everything that we've talked about, how do you hope to see the public and private sector working together even more on cybersecurity in the future?
Yeah, I'm gonna butcher and potentially misattribute this quote, but but here I go. I think Henry Ford said, "Coming together is a start, keeping together is progress, and working together is success." And I think that applies beautifully to public-private cooperation. In terms of the future, I think the existing mechanisms are there. And as a community, we just need to make a habit of using them. And threat information sharing is especially important. So an organization's security posture, we know, can change from day to day, even hour to hour. And criminals are constantly looking for new vulnerabilities and finding new tactics and techniques to breach systems. And criminals move fast, That's why our model of combining security services with traditional financial risk mitigation is so powerful. We help our insureds improve their security posture, and then we monitor and alert them to new risks. Our model of combining security services with traditional financial tools is really powerful. We can help our insureds become more secure, and then we help by monitoring and alerting them to new risks. So for small business owners, it's like having, a team of secret cyber nerds looking out for you.
I love that. That's great. Well, this has been a great conversation overall. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
It was so cool to hear Sezaneh's perspective on the US cyber trust mark from both her time at the White House and at Coalition. And I love how she described the work they do at Coalition for small business owners as a team of secret cyber nerds looking out for you. That's what everyone needs. By the way, she mentioned a quote that has been attributed to Henry Ford in her interview. She said she was afraid she would butcher it, but she did a great job off the top of her head. The full quote, for anyone who's interested, is "Coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success." And it's also been attributed to Edward Everett Hale, an American author, poet, historian, and Unitarian minister. So while this podcast can't confirm its origins, I can confirm it's a great sentiment for the partnership between cyber insurers and their insureds. My next guest has an equally impressive perspective on this topic. Mike Bergman is the Vice President for Technology and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association, an organization that over the past 5 years provided recommendations for the development of the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark program. Mike joined CTA in 2013 as Senior Director of Technology and Standards, and in addition to managing CTA's web application video ecosystem project, he also directs industry efforts to improve Internet of Things cybersecurity. Prior to joining CTA, he was Vice President of New Technologies for Kenwood USA, serving as co-chair of the National Radio Systems Committee's Digital Radio Broadcast Subcommittee, and Vice President of Engineering and Radios at Sirius Satellite Radio. He also is a former men's gymnast for the team at the University of California, Berkeley, where he received his degree in electrical engineering. And he holds 2 U.S. patents, casually, as one does, for programmable memory process technologies. He has such a cool background and helped me unpack all of my burning questions about the program, like what will the requirements be, how might insurers use it to assess coverage, how will it change the cybersecurity landscape, and what color will it be? Here's what he had to say about all of that and more. Hi, Mike. It's great to be speaking with you today. How are you doing?
Hi, Elizabeth. Great. Thank you. Appreciate you giving me a little of your time.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I appreciate your time too. I'm looking forward to the conversation all about the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. But before we get there, I was wondering if you could just start off sort of talking a little bit about your background and some of the work that you do at the Consumer Technology Association.
Sure. I am an engineer by training. I started off as a chip designer doing memory chips and other things. I worked in technical standards and product design, wireless products and media products. And so I had kind of a broad experience in developing and managing the development of consumer and computer products. And from there, got into cybersecurity about a decade ago. I've been with CTA for most of that time. And what we've been doing in this, my current role is Vice President of Technology and Standards at CTA, but what we've been doing in this whole picture is working with our members and with people in the private sector and with NIST primarily. NIST has been a huge leader in this space to develop solutions to this problem of compromised connected devices. When connected devices get hacked, bad things happen. So a connected device can be used to pivot into your network, into your home network, into your enterprise network. So you take a device with poor security and it can be an entry point into a network. Or large groups of a particular model of a device installed throughout the world can be compromised and then repurposed as these sort of like robotic devices. We call them bots, and a group of them is called a botnet. So what we end up with is hundreds of thousands of devices can attack U.S. infrastructure. So this happened in 2016. It's a famous attack called the Mirai botnet attack. And what happened was the long and the short of it is that 150 of the most popular websites in the United States went down as a result of this massive compromise of a few models from one company, along with some other products. But there was something like 350,000 devices, it was estimated, were sending attack traffic all simultaneously. And so we lost PayPal and eBay and Yahoo and a bunch of other websites that were very, very popular at the time. So what's been happening since then is industry and government have been working together to find solutions to start pushing back on all of this. So that's a long answer to your question, my background and the work I do at CTA, but the Consumer Technology Association is the trade association for the tech industry. We own and produce the Consumer Electronics Show. We aggregate the work and input and efforts of something like 1,500 member companies right now. So we're kind of central to this tech industry question of what to do about these botnets and these compromised connected devices, and how do we protect consumers as a result.
Yeah, that's great background. And I'm glad you're here because I know you have a lot of great experience, studying this. And, you mentioned in a CTA press release that connected devices have revolutionized how we live. But as you just mentioned, when they get hacked, bad things happen. So I know you mentioned botnets, but I'm curious, what are some of the other biggest threats that consumers should keep in mind when it comes to their connected devices?
That's a great question. Thank you. So the problem is we don't really know. When you are a consumer with a connected device, you have no real way of telling whether your device has been compromised or not just by looking at it. The hacker wants to keep the device in place, wants you to keep it powered up, doesn't want you to interfere with it. So they want the primary function to keep going. So if you have an inkjet printer or a video doorbell, you don't know if it's actually trying to do something else, like be part of a botnet. But you may get some funky behavior. So that's the first thing to watch out for a consumer is the device doing something that you don't want it to do? And is it no longer doing things the way the manufacturer intended as well as the manufacturer wanted, because it's also busy doing something else? The second thing to worry about is access to the data running on your network. And this is maybe not the first concern, because most people sort of hide in the anonymity of the crowd. But if someone does decide to target you, they can potentially get access to your network through a compromised device, and then see the traffic on your network. And then that may include print things that you're printing. It may include login IDs. One of the ways that hackers like to get into individual bank accounts is by not watching the traffic that you have between you and your bank, because banks are pretty good at encrypting all of that. But maybe you've got a website that you like that is, just a neighborhood homeowners association website or something else really minor and small, not important, but you use the same password there as you do with your bank. That's super common. People reuse their passwords all the time. And so your passwords flowing over your network on the unencrypted sites might be helpful for the hacker who's trying to get into your bank account. So there's a few things where you really want to be careful about the security of your home devices. And that's why this is so important for consumers, that we give them transparency and the ability to see what's going on out there.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that is a really scary thing that we don't always know or can't always predict what the risks actually are. But I think that's a great framework for where consumers can start, working on their cybersecurity with these devices. And I think, the US Cyber Trust Mark is a great step in that direction too. I know that the Consumer Technology Association worked with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, like you said, and other organizations for more than 5 years to develop this labeling program. So how did that all come together? And, why is now the right time for something like that?
That's really a timely question because I mentioned transparency. We're trying to give consumers transparency, and that's not just manufacturers' websites that talk about their security, which is helpful and important, and you should look at that if you're buying a product. But this is going to be a mark on the packaging. This will be a U.S. sort of, you could call it like a seal of approval, but it's a certification mark. The product and the manufacturer have met certain requirements for security. This is protection for you, the consumer. And so this gives you the ability to go to the store and make a choice. You can look actively for products that have that mark and make a decision to purchase the ones that are complying with these requirements, that are upping their game in security, that are trying to protect you a little bit more, and providing more transparency about what they do in security through this program. This all came together through first a Trump administration executive order telling several different agencies, we have this huge problem with connected device security. What can we do about it? Start working out some solutions. Well, they came up with a roadmap, and one of the elements on the roadmap was to develop some minimum security requirements that we can all live with, we can all adopt. And then the Biden administration followed up with another executive order that said, well, what about a label program? And asked NIST to develop the outline of a label program. NIST did that, and this is in conjunction with my organization, CTA. We have filed hundreds of pages of comments and support and assistance in this program over the last 5-6 years. And many other organizations, individual companies. There's a lot of big manufacturers who have been really persistent about improving their own security. And that shows, if you look at the kind of data that we have access to, that shows, and they're all big supporters of this program. And so the FCC has picked up the program at the urging of the White House. NIST is going to support them. Industry is behind it. Private sector advocates are behind this whole picture. We've got universities, we've got the Consumer Reports is behind it. UL, the big test house, is behind it, and their competitors that aren't as well known to the average American, like InsurTech and DECRA and Eurofins. So there's a lot of momentum from both the public sector and the private sector. All of these groups pushing together. We've got members of Congress on the Hill supporting this. Everybody's pushing in the same direction, which is great. Now we're working on the details. The other part of your question, I think, was something like, why is now the time for this? And honestly, the time for this is as soon as we can get this up and running, because what we're seeing is consumer sentiment has turned over the past 5 years. More and more consumers are interested in cybersecurity. More and more they're willing to try to find a way to purchase something that will protect them better. They're concerned about the security, but also their data privacy. And cybersecurity is a part of data privacy. If you want to protect your information, you need cybersecurity to do that. So what we end up with is consumer sentiment is moving towards being ready to use a tool like this. The private sector and the government across the board has been working on it for 5 years, and we're almost ready to launch at this point. We're getting now down to the details of the program. It's all coming together quite well. And one more bit, we have industry alliances that are putting together security programs that could be authorized under this program to issue the marks. So we've got things like the Connectivity Standards Alliance and and IOXT. These are two industry alliances. They may not be well known to everyone, but these are industry alliances that have security programs that manufacturers can qualify under. And these programs have been built and aligned to these government requirements that have been developed with the work between organizations like ours and NIST. So all of this is just grown together. Everybody's been recognizing a common problem. Everyone has worked together to solve this problem. The consumers are ready. So now it really is the time for this.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like it really couldn't be coming at a better time. So many consumers are much more aware of their cyber risk than they have been in the past. And I think that's because of all the work that the public and private sectors have done to raise awareness. So that's a great point. And I know that, as you mentioned, a lot of groups have come together in support of this. So CTA has been really deeply involved in developing some of the requirements for the program. And I was curious what specifications products will have to meet to receive the US Cyber Trust Mark, and how did you decide on what those are?
Yeah, so there was a really interesting process. NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. The National Institute of Standards and Technology um, is an expert at putting together multi-stakeholder processes where they will bring in organizations and people who have an interest in the subject matter, who can provide expertise, and get to some consensus on what the solution needs to be. And what they did in this particular case is engineer a series of multi-stakeholder processes over the past half decade in order to identify what minimum security requirements should be part of this program. And so in terms of the product itself, you've got things like the product has to be secure when you try to access it. You can't just have anybody over the internet open up a user's guide, find a default password, reach out to your network in your home, log into your device, and change settings. The product should be updatable by the manufacturer when they find a new flaw or exploit and need to correct it in your product after it's been installed in your home. So there should be a means to do software updates. The product should protect data. It should encrypt data when it's transmitting and receiving it, and it should protect it on the device itself so that it can't be read easily. There should be ways to configure the product for more secure operation, but you should have options as a consumer to change those settings. You should be able to identify this device when it's on your network. That's a very simple one, but it really helps when you are trying to understand what bad thing is happening at the moment. And then finally, the device itself, these are all aspects of the device. The device itself should be aware of its cybersecurity state to a certain extent. If someone has tried to change the software on the device and put in some malware, when the device boots up at the beginning of a power cycle or checks itself during the day, it should be able to recognize that something has changed. So there's a certain amount of awareness. So these are all, if you think about the physical device that you could hold in your hands, these are all requirements of the device itself. NIST has further gone on to say, honestly, look, if you sell the consumer a front door doorbell, video doorbell, I'm sorry, if you sell them a video doorbell that has cloud storage for video and it's got an app with our brand name on it where we can control the front door appliance and we can help you view the videos and it's all tied together, isn't that really the product, not just the hardware on the front door? So shouldn't these cybersecurity requirements apply to the whole product? And so that's currently the momentum, is to protect the consumer, not just for the individual hardware piece, but for the whole packages sold to them and what they actually purchased as a consumer. Now, along with these actual product capabilities, there are also some requirements on the manufacturer in terms of what they do in order to develop and maintain the product through its life cycle. So there's things like, what documentation should they need to keep on the product? How do they handle questions about the security of their product from, let's say, a consumer or from a university researcher? How do they get information out to consumers that there's been a problem or that they need to take some action, or maybe even that they're no longer able to support it? It's been 7 years or whatever the number is, and they're no longer doing security updates because the product's out of date. How do they educate consumers or others about their particular product and what the consumer can best do to protect themselves in installing and using the product. So there's a number of activities on the part of the manufacturer that will be part of complying for this overall trust mark. So between the product requirements that I mentioned, including things like encryption and updates, and the manufacturer or the developer activities, including things like documentation and information dissemination, all of that are these technical and non-technical requirements that roll into gaining the mark for your product.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of what consumers can expect, when this US Cyber Trust Mark officially launches. So that's really helpful. And, one thing I was curious as well, because, I cover the insurance industry as well as, cybersecurity. Do you see this mark being something companies will require for any IoT devices used within their organizations or even for insurers, when writing cyber coverage for a company that's using connected devices?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because one of the things that we get a lot is how much will consumers look for this mark? And is it justified to go through all of this effort? Because it's a lot of effort. Is it justified to go through all of this effort for consumers to look for the mark? What if they don't look for the mark? But here's the thing, consumers aren't the only target. First of all, research does show that consumers are increasingly interested in a mark or some way of making a selection. There's even now research that shows that they'll pay a premium price for a product that has some kind of security marking or certification. But then you look at other types of organizations. I'm going to go through a short list, right? Enterprises. Enterprises use these types of devices. They may be called consumer products in some cases, but enterprises often will install these products on their networks. They're interested. Retailers. Retailers want to protect their consumers. Retailers want to protect their brand names. Retailers want to stock product that isn't going to cause problems for people. They want to, when they bring in a manufacturer's product under their own brand name, whether it's Best Buy or Target or Walmart, I mean, they all have in-store brands. They want to be able to specify something that is not going to cause a problem for the consumer, for their customers. So retailers are interested in having access to this information, to this mark. And so when we get to insurers, I'll freely admit this is not my space. I've had a number of discussions with insurers in the past, and I don't know that I'm up to date on how the insurance industry views these challenges. But there is certainly an opportunity to buy down risk by focusing attention on products that have been designed, developed, and are being maintained with improved cybersecurity. So I'd be very interested to hear how insurers view this in the future. But at this point, I have to say it's a powerful tool that we're developing, and I hope that it does get some attention.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's so early right now. I'm sure there's a lot to still work out. And I'm looking forward to, seeing how this evolves in the future in terms of the insurance industry. So that's a good point. And you sort of led into my next question as well, because I know we were talking just before this and you said, feel free to ask any questions that pop into your head. And you mentioned one that I can't stop thinking about now. But you mentioned some of the concern about how, consumers might not look for the US Cyber Trust Mark or what to do if that happens. So what color will it be? Can you give us any hints?
So the FCC has drafted a mark. It looks sort of like the outline of a shield with some printed circuit board patterns in the center. And that mark they've shown us in black and white, in an inverted white on black. They've shown it in 3 other color schemes, and they're getting it trademarked through the USPTO. So depending on the manufacturer wanting to put it on the package in different colors, they've got that option. The different color schemes, there's a red and green, there's a yellow and green, there's a yellow and blue. So you'll have your choices. Maybe you could not only look for the mark, but look for the one that matches your bedroom. I don't know. looks well in the kitchen, things like that.
Right. You can work it into the design scheme of your home or your company. That's great.
Yeah, if it's not obvious, this is not my strength.
No, that's great. And, we've covered so much so far. So, I really appreciate your time in speaking with me. Just one last question. I know you mentioned the US Cyber Trust Mark. It's not officially launched yet, but when it launches, what do you expect will be the impact of the mark? And do you expect it to be effective in reducing cyber risk?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what, let me start by saying what we've seen in the past is the major brands, larger companies have been improving cybersecurity over time. We also know that there's a number of small firms that are starting with cybersecurity first. So there's companies out there that have done a lot of work to get good cybersecurity into their product, but they're not recognized for it. There's no way for consumers to see that. They're all over this. They're very excited about the program. And so what I think you'll see is a fairly quick transition, a fairly quick uptake by a few selected brands first. And I've already had conversations with companies that weren't involved in the program, weren't involved in any of the multi-stakeholder efforts, but I've heard rumors about labeling and marks and things like that. And they're already trying to find ways to get the marks on their own products just for competitive reasons. Car companies are putting third-party cybersecurity marks that aren't this particular one, not a US government one, but private marks showing that they've been tested by a private firm. They're putting that on their websites. So I think we'll see a fairly quick uptake by a number of companies. And then from there, we'll see competitive pressure and a slower uptake on the rest of the industry. So what it'll do, I think, is it will allow a lever by which everyone can start working on risk. Because once you have the opportunity to see this mark, once you have that transparency about how long you're going to get updates, how what other measures have been taken, then when the cyber insurer is writing a risk policy, they're being able to delve in a little bit into corporate policies in terms of purchase selection, of procurement. That's going to potentially make a difference, not the first year. And I think you use the word evolve in terms of the cybersecurity, cyber risk industry. We'll have to see how that goes, but it's an opportunity for leverage. We also know that the federal government already has these requirements for this type of program in place. It went into place in December of last year. So for 8 months now, the federal government has had these requirements already in place. So overall, I think it's a beginning of a sea change, and it'll give the insurance industry an extra tool to sort through opportunities. It will give vendors an opportunity to differentiate themselves, and it'll give consumers an opportunity to protect themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something that I'm definitely looking forward to, continuing to follow as it evolves. And, I've learned so much from this conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
It's been my pleasure, Elizabeth. I will look forward to seeing it posted, and have a great day.
Well, that's it for this episode, and that concludes our 2-part episode series on the US Cyber Trust Mark program. I love that we had the chance to learn from a cybersecurity expert, a consumer technology expert, and an insurance and public policy expert to hear more about this program and its impact. I hope you learned a lot. I definitely did. Thanks to Sezaneh and Mike for taking the time to speak with me for this episode, and thanks to all of you for listening. Once again, my name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm the host of the Insuring Cyber podcast, a bi-monthly look into how the world of cyber and the business of insurance are connected. Be sure to check back for new episodes publishing every other Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you next time.